Hello, you are listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Now, our guest today is Lisa Erickson, author of Chakra Empowerment for Women. You can find out more about Lisa Erickson at chakraempowermentforwomen.com. Welcome, Lisa Erickson.
Thank you, Catherine. Thanks for having me.
Now, Lisa Erickson, you and I both do energy healing. Mm-hmm. What is the difference between men and women's energy systems?
Well, what I have really worked with, I work with the sacral chakra, the second chakra, a lot. I do a lot of work with women during life transits such as menopause, pregnancy, postpartum, even menstruation issues. And then I also do a lot of sexual trauma healing. So that work really led me to research the second chakra in particular and the locations of the lower chakras. And there is a lot more differentiation in the traditional systems between men and women that really ever made it to the West and into Western books, because so many of the initial yoga teachers that brought chakra teachings were male. And some of the teachings really just didn't get here. And it's really important for women to understand the differences in their sacral chakra, that their sacral chakra, like their physical body, waxes and wanes with their menstrual cycle. It has certain energetic cycles that impacts their energetic boundaries and shifts a lot at these reproductive phases of their life, like pregnancy and menopause, and is particularly wounded by sexual abuse, sexual assault in a way that's slightly different from men, and that really needs to be worked with for a woman to embody her power. Her power is really anchored in the sacral chakra as opposed to the root chakra. And of course, we all need to work with all of them, but that difference in anchoring really impacts the way that women need to work with their chakras, in my experience.
So going back to the question for our audience, what are some of the main differences between the female energy system, in your opinion, and the male energy system?
Well, the number one thing is that the male energy system is anchored in the root chakra, which is what is traditionally taught. Women's energy bodies are anchored in their second chakra. Now, I will say that is a spectrum. So in terms of individuals, in terms of how they identify, I find that individuals who identify as female, even if they were born in a biological male body, do tend to experience their energy body is anchored in the sacral chakra. So it's a spectrum though. But because a woman's energy body is anchored in the second chakra, which is a yin receptive chakra by default, our energy bodies overall tend to be more absorbent, more empathic, and also more cyclical, both monthly and over the course of our lifetime. So learning how to work with boundaries and learning to understand how our energy system waxes and wanes is really critical to our energetic health.
Right. And you brought up something that's very important for our audience, because as you know, and as we now know, there are people who identify as gay. There's a people also who identify as transgender. The people who identify as gay or transgender, how do their energy bodies differ?
I find that it is individual, but in general, if people are trans or pan-gender, they tend to identify with whatever their chakra system tends to map to whatever gender they identify with, as opposed to biological sex. When it comes to gay or lesbian, it's really very diverse. I find that, yes, some gay men identify more with a feminine energy body and some do not, and the same with gay women. So I think these differences, I really look at them like a spectrum. And as long as you know the differences, you can kind of decide, where do I resonate with? And then that can impact how you work with your chakras.
Right. Okay. And for our audience, will you back up and explain? Many of us know what our chakras are, but from your perspective, what are the chakras, and what are the different, since we're talking about first and second chakras, what's the first chakra about and what's the second chakra about?
Yeah. Yeah. So the chakras are energy centers, and they are the primary energy centers in our energy body. There are different mappings, anywhere from 4 to 10 considered to be the main energy mappings, or 12 if you count out of body ones, even 13 in some systems. In chakra empowerment for women, I really stuck with the 7 chakra system that most people in the West have become familiar with, just so there was some familiarity. And in that system, the root chakra is usually associated with the tailbone. That's what I use as the focal point, the legs, the feet, and the genitalia. And it's linked to all of those parts of our body, as well as the psychological functions of feeling present in our body and feeling grounded, feeling stable and secure, and being able to function in the world in a stable, secure way. It's also linked into our ancestry and our family in a lot of ways, the genetic component of our energy body. And then the second chakra, I work with really for women in the womb, which is a little lower than some traditions do. But I find for women that is really critical to link into that part of their body. A lot of tantric teachings focus on that as a doorway really into powerful spiritual energies for women. But regardless, in men or women, it's linked to our emotional body and our adaptability, our fluidity, really. The root chakra is like this solid anchor linked to earth, the element of earth. The sacral chakra is linked to water, our emotional fluidity, and then sexuality and sensuality. So we all need to work with all of those chakras, but this difference in men and women's mean that men's identity tends to be tied more to the root chakra issues, and women's identity tends to be tied more to the second chakra issues.
Right. Now, I've also written extensively about the chakras in my book, What is Healing? Awaken Your Intuitive Power for Health and Happiness. I have a whole appendix where I talk about the chakras and, you know, how they manifest when they're balanced, how they manifest when they're deficient and over energy, and so on. And I agree with your description of the first and second chakras. I would add that the first chakra has a lot to do with grounding and tribal identities, right?
Yeah.
So some of the issues with first chakra are roots, you know, where you consider yourself to be rooted, grounding, trust. Your physical health has to do with your adrenal glands, your home, your family, again, who you consider to be tribe and not tribe. This is appropriate boundaries, has to do with money, courage, vitality, self-confidence, survival, and it's also the seat of Kundalini. And then with second chakra, you know, which is, again, we agree about, you know, where they are, the issues associated with there are sexuality, the ability to experience pleasure, creativity, power, intimate relationships, desire, and sexual identity. And again, it's like, who, you know, how do I identify with myself? So based on these differences that you perceive in the way that men's energy centers work and the way that women's energy centers work, how do you recommend a woman work differently with her energy body, particularly her chakras, than a man?
Well, you know, first I wanted to come back to something you said, because it's interesting. My doorway into the chakras was Kundalini meditation. That's what I did for many years before I transitioned into energy healing. And in fact, a lot of the teachings for women seat the Kundalini in the woman's second chakra, that it's pooled for a man at the root and for a woman in the sacral. And so for women, one of the first things, whether they're working from a healing or spiritual perspective, is grounding the Kundalini. So it's almost like you focus on your sacral, you ground it in the root, whereas a man, it's more about activating it. A woman's is almost already activated. When she starts to menstruate, it's already activated to a greater degree than a man's, but it needs to be anchored, whereas a man's trying to activate it. So that's one perspective from a personal growth. But then for women, I think because they are seated in that sacral chakra, energetic boundaries are so important. And really getting that root, sacral, and navel chakra. I tend for women to work with the navel as the focal for the third chakra, even though it encompasses the whole solar plexus digestive system. Getting those three really working together as a strong foundation, and that root and navel really providing protection and grounding for that sacral chakra. And then working with those sacral chakra issues, particularly shame, I think is for both men and women a primary blocker of the second chakra. But working with any internalized negative messaging around sexuality for women, this whole way that we're sort of, either pure or impure, all of those ways that we relate to sexuality in our culture impact a woman's second chakra even more than a man's. So a lot of those themes become very important when working with the second chakra for a woman.
Very interesting, Lisa Erickson. And in my book, What is Healing? Awaken Your Intuitive Power for Health and Happiness, I talk about some signs that your second chakra energy may be deficient. These include rigid physical body and attitudes, like literally being stiff,
Yep.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Fear of sex.
Mm-hmm.
And my view, not that I'm right, is that you are a soul, you have a body, but we also have this human animal. It's part of pleasure. And denial of pleasure is a sign that you're deficient in second chakra. Poor social skills. Also excessive boundaries, like being a control freak. Lack of desire, passion, or excitement, and feeling powerless. On the other hand, if your second chakra is over energy, you may experience mood swings, addictions, especially to sex, drugs, or alcohol, excessive sensitivity, like being way too sensitive, especially being emotionally oversensitive, overpowering or invading others, again, being a control freak, emotional codependency, and obsessive attachments. So in your experience working with women with their chakras, and I can appreciate what you're saying about Kundalini yoga. I've taught yoga myself for 25 years. What are some of the things that we women need to do to keep our second chakra balanced?
Well, I think everything that you just said, I agree with everything. And it's so interesting because I work with sexual trauma survivors a lot. So I see a lot of patterns of disassociating from the lower chakras too. So there's issues of blocking in the chakras, and then there's issues of just disassociating, not connecting at all. So maybe we can get into that later, but first addressing some of your, in terms for women, in terms of really balancing that second chakra, I find it's often about the connection between the root, second, and navel, that the navel and root provide that balancing energy and finding the right balance between the three. So the control issue, for example, that you talked about, rooted in fear, is often a gripping in the navel chakra or solar plexus chakra, whatever focal point someone's working with. There's always fear patterns underlying it. Often emotional work needs to be done with the fear patterns themselves. I like to work with people really trying to find how they experience fear or anxiety in their body and learning how to actually dissolve it somatically in the body. And then imagine relaxing the navel chakra. It's almost like there's a fist in there going like this and relaxing it. So there's this sense of flow, especially between those lower three chakras. Then in the sacral chakra itself, really learning to relate to pleasure and sensuality differently. So just little things. I mean, I love meditating on the second chakra and visualizing a flower there. But in daily life, just really experimenting with subtle pleasures, the smell of a flower or a nice texture, really eating mindfully and feeling that as a whole body sensation, which is something we all need because in today's culture, I think we're just run, throw in the food, run on to the next thing. Like it's a whole nother level of mindfulness to really experience pleasure in your body. And that's such a doorway and healing energy for the sacral chakra and balancing energy for the sacral chakra.
Right. And again, you and I are very much in alignment.
We definitely are, yes.
Definitely. Some other things that you can do to keep your second chakra balanced, and this is true whether you're a man or a woman, giving or receiving massage. So you can
Yeah,
get a massage or you can give a massage, because when
yeah,
you, even whether you're giving it or receiving it, you're feeling the physical, you're feeling into the physical body, taking a bath, enjoying that water element,
yeah,
working with your hands. So this could be knitting, crewel work, needlepoint, right? Making pots, swimming, again, the water element,
yeah,
sitting in a rocking chair, okay? Rocking chair, cleaning your house, because again, we're talking here about women and energy, and our nest is super important for women, right? I mean,
yeah,
having a good home is important for everybody. That's part of, that root chakra, but cleaning your house, getting your nest right, feeling music. So not just listening, but feeling the rhythm of it. Inner child work, allowing your hips to sway when walking to get the energy moving. Um,
yeah,
12-step programs for addictions. Develop a healthy hobby just for fun. The healthy boundaries we talked about. And, definitely clearing issues to having healthy relationships. I think that's so important, because a lot of us, when we're younger, we just think, oh, you're cute, I'm attracted to you, let's have a relationship. But it's something else to learn how to get your needs met in a
yeah,
relationship and understand what you need in a relationship. Honoring your femininity and the color orange, whether it's eating orange fruits and vegetables, wearing orange, using gemstones that help that, the orange gemstones, right?
yeah, yeah,
So now, when we have experienced trauma, such as you mentioned sexual abuse, and we've had other guests on our show talking about recovering from sexual abuse. How does sexual abuse affect our second chakra and the energy system of women in general?
yeah. Well, the most common thing that I find is some level of disassociation from the lower chakras, not simply the sacral, but really both the first and the second. It plays itself out in different ways for different individuals, but it can actually result in a lot of healing work not taking. And someone will be like, I've done everything, I've done this, I've done that. And really, because their energy body's not linked into the physical body, energy work becomes almost astral or imaginal. It's not actually integrating into the physical body. So the first thing that has to happen is this linking of the energy body back into the root chakra. Sometimes that has to do with really unpacking what are the methods they're disassociating. Are they fragmented? Are they going away whenever they feel anxious? Are they triggered into just extreme mental activity? And just everything's up here. So it could be astral, could be mental. Of course, it could be rise to the level of substance abuse or video game addiction, anything that really is just disconnecting from the body. And so that takes some time to really learn to reconnect with the body. What's so interesting to me is I've even found individuals who will say to me, oh no, I'm super in my body. I exercise all the time, every day, right? But in fact, it's a very disconnected form of exercise. They'll work out for 3 hours watching a movie, or their relationship to their body is one of it's never good enough. So the exercise is almost self-punishing. So it's not actually representative of a grounded, healthy, present relationship to the body. So that's always first. Then in the sacral chakra, there often are a lot of blocks around shame and self-blame, or messages or feelings of sexuality essentially being bad, or their sexual energy being bad, or that their worth is only tied to sexual desirability, which has led to a lot of unhealthy sexual relationships. It can play out either way. So really getting into that emotional relationship to sex, to pleasure, and to how they have integrated that with their sense of their body. And so it's first about kind of working to ground, and then about the shame and self-blame in relationship to sexuality with the second chakra.
Right. Lisa Erickson, again, we're so in alignment. And I remember years ago, one of the first books I ever read about healing, about energy healing, was Barbara Ann Brennan. Her
It's
book,
like,
Hands of Light.
yeah,
Yes, beautiful book. And in Hands of Light, she has illustrations of the different energetic defense mechanisms, right? And when you understand, like, this is just a defense mechanism. So
yes,
if you were assaulted, I'll just use that word. Sometimes it, like, maybe the safest place to be at that time was to be out of your body, right? And
yeah,
then you have to, as part of healing, it's again that reconnection that you're very much talking about. But there's many different energetic patterns, like being literally beside yourself. I love that phrase. I was beside myself. Well,
yeah.
yeah, you were like, you were over
One
there.
step over. Yeah.
You were over there. And what I find in my work as a medical intuitive, whenever anybody has been assaulted, again, whether this is rape or any kind of severe trauma, there's literally holes in the energetic field.
Yeah.
And so I'll like literally read the energetic body, and then I will find the places where there's literally tears in the energetic field. I'll give an example of this. Years ago, I worked with a young man, and I recall the school asked me to work with him because nobody could figure out what was wrong. And what would happen is his case, he was going to the gym and he would work out so hard, he would literally pass out and they'd have to call an ambulance. But what had happened was he had been raped. And we have to remember that men get raped, you know, maybe not as often as women. I don't know what the statistics are, but both men and women get raped. So as a young man, he'd been raped. I was only the second person that he ever discussed it with. And he had a hole in the back of his body where he had been assaulted. And I remember I did an energy healing to fix the hole in his field. And I remember the next day I saw him after that. He said, I know you helped me, but you have no idea how much you helped me. So this difficulty integrating healing work when you have had traumatic experiences where you've been assaulted, including rape, but all kinds of things where you've been assaulted, I'll just use that general term. There literally is tears, there are tears in the energetic field, and you have to work with a trained energy healer to find out where those heals are and literally patch them. So
Yes.
it's, I could discuss, like, that could be a whole discussion in itself about what causes those tears. And then you can literally receive. Otherwise, when you have holes in your energetic field, there's many things that happen. You become hypersensitive to energy. So these are the people who are sensitive to cell phones and computers and so on, and just extreme sensitivity, multiple chemical sensitivity, again.
Yeah. Well, and it's so interesting because that's been my experience too. Well, and then you can get into a whole nother discussion around for people that were in long-term abuse situations, the cords, even in a relation that's been long in the past. So you have the holes, and then sometimes you have cords that have never been resolved or cut and all of that. And what is so interesting is that when someone is disassociated in some way, not linked into their body, their energy body is actually unprotected, and they tend to absorb energies more. And they'll be saying, oh, I do everything. I have this protective mechanism and that protective mechanism, and nothing works. And they think it's just hypersensitivity that's just innate, and there's nothing that can be done about it. But in fact, they are not able to actually manifest those energetic boundaries because of a hole, a cord, dissociating from the lower body. And once you solve those problems and their root chakras linked back up, they are able to manifest energetic bodies. They have a lot more resilience. They actually can handle situations that they never thought they were going to be able to handle. So it is very interesting. That foundation of the house, those chakras no one wants to work on, right? Everyone's like the heart, the third eye.
Yeah, right.
You have to get down in those lower chakras.
Yeah. No, for our audience, Lisa Erickson and I need to explain what cords are. So I'm going to explain it. I'm going to give it a go, and then we can both talk about that. But whenever you're intimate with anyone, you form energetic connections, right? Also, even if you're not intimate with someone. So for example, mothers always have cord connections to the chakras. So what are we talking about? These are invisible energetic connections, and they run from you to from you and your chakras to the chakras and energy centers of the other people that you're close to. So mothers have energetic connections, boyfriend, girlfriend, 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 boyfriend, boyfriend. And I can read what any relationship is like based on what the cord connections are. So, and when you are no longer in relationship with someone, you want to cut the cords. And if you don't cut the cords to your previous relationship, then you get what I call psychic whack, where all of a sudden you're feeling the other person's energy. You don't even know why you don't feel good, right? But I've had clients, they were divorced 12 years ago, and they're still energetically connected with their ex, and they're not able to move on. So Lisa Erickson, for our audience, how would you describe these cords, and how do they help us? How do they interfere with our functioning?
Yeah, exactly the way that you've described them. You've described them beautifully. And I think in terms of being able to cut them, there's always two components. There's the technical process of really just feeling into that line and cutting it. And energy workers like you and I can help someone with that. Often someone can do that part themselves, right? You can visualize the person, the line, and cut it. But then to keep it really deactivated, you really have to be very self-aware and understand, are there areas where there hasn't been emotional closure that you are still clinging to that relationship? There's some hope it's going to come back. There's some hope that there's going to be some resolution in some way. I find with sexual abuse survivors, especially childhood sexual abuse survivors, it's often whatever manipulative game their abuser, the space they put them in, and the shame or self-blame has been internalized to such a level that they may feel as if they hate that abuser, they've cut that line, they've done everything, but there's some internalization of self-blame that is preventing them from fully cutting that line and moving forward. So it's different for each person, but you have to really get into some of those emotional issues if a line does not really seem to be going. And the mother-child energy line is something I work with a lot. I work with a lot of women postpartum. It can be a big adjustment. It definitely can contribute to postpartum depression if a woman is struggling with being able to close the door on that line for periods of time to rejuvenate and regain the energetic integrity of her body. And over the lifetime of a child, and I have 3 teenagers now, so we're definitely in that phase where that line needs to be, cutting off, and that's their job, is to try to do so. If a mother is not allowing that line, that child, to gain more and more energetic independence, that can become an issue for both the mother and the child. So that's another area I like to do a lot of work.
Right. So let's also describe for our audience what it looks like if you're, a good way to think of it is your chakras can get clogged, right? So, so big picture, when we talk about healing, from my perspective as a medical intuitive, there's your physical body, the energy body, which is what we're talking about. There is emotional body, which we're also talking about, the mental body, your thoughts and beliefs, and also your soul. So when you've had abuse, again, it can affect you on all the levels. But again, if we don't resolve the issues in the second chakra, then from my perspective, what it looks like is it looks clogged. And I'm going to give everybody a visual. If you think about your shower, if you've ever had a lot of human hair there and it's just not flowing properly, that's kind of what a clogged chakra looks like. So Lisa Erickson, how would you describe what a clogged chakra looks like?
I agree. I think that's a great description. And I think there's different things that can happen. So a clog is like a buildup of energy, a block. And when someone has lines coming into a chakra from someone else, part of what's clogging it is that person's emotions, right? So you're not just dealing with your own emotional patterns, you're dealing with someone else's. So you have to really let that go along with the line. So you're just dealing with your own emotional patterns. And then there can be kind of wounds, holes, there can be imbalances of flow between the chakras. And then there can be kind of partial blocks, or I guess that's really what you're talking about with a clog. A clog can be full, it can be partial. You can feel like certain aspects of the chakra express very well, and others are completely shut down. And they really link into both the physical and emotional body. And what's so interesting is so many physical maladies that have roots in the energy body, I won't say they're caused by it, but have roots in it, are also in that way. Like for women who've experienced sexual abuse and assault, I haven't found a study on it, but I find such a high number that have ovarian cysts and uterine fibroids, right? So I would love for a study someday to be done on that if the numbers are actually higher. It's literally like a physical block representing that energy and emotional block.
Yeah, I've got a client right now who has who recovered from cervical cancer, right? Mm-hmm. And right now we're just working on the physical aspects, but I know extremely well that there's going to be a certain history there that's not been resolved. So so again, let's talk about what are some physical manifestations for women when your second chakra isn't working well.
Yeah. So those uterine fibroids, ovarian cysts, fertility issues, also can manifest in bladder, UTIs, urinary tract infections. I think those are the main things that I see. So whenever someone presents with something like that, I'm going to be gently probing for any of that history of abuse or assault. If it's not there, sometimes there's more cultural factors, conditioning factors, really that they were made to feel ashamed of their sexuality and body, regardless of any physical abuse occurred. So I think there's always something in relation to the sacral chakra usually to work through.
Right. And low back pain. And
sacral back pain, yeah.
Low back pain, and also, again, going back to addictions, whether it's a food addiction or a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, because you're using that thing, the over exercising, in order to disassociate with your feelings. And I tell all my clients, you're well when you can sit there and cry or get mad or have a panic attack and not need to eat, overexercise, drink, take a drug, legal or illegal. You just feel your feelings.
And you can withstand it. They talk a lot in trauma healing about expanding your window of tolerance. Your sense that, oh, this is painful and I can just be with it and go through it, as opposed to going into my usual mechanism for getting through it, for escaping it. Yeah.
Now, so a lot of people talk about the divine feminine and feminine power. So how, as women, can we balance our second chakra and express this true goddess energy in your opinion?
Yeah. Well, for me, this is what it's all about, working with that sacral chakra and helping that to light up our whole feminine energy body. And I really work with the sacral, the heart, and the third eye as a particular feminine pathway. So particularly empowering those, bringing them forth, and owning that on an energy body level, that is what the divine feminine is, whether someone thinks of it in terms of spiritual growth or it's more of how they carry themselves in the world. It's owning their sexuality as a part of their positive expression without being defined by it. And it's being feeling part of this larger matrix that right now we have this rebalancing occurring between the feminine and masculine. It's happening in all of us, including men, right? Men need to be really owning and awakening to their feminine as well, because all of those qualities have been denigrated in both men and women. And it's part of the reason, from my perspective, that we're out of balance with the earth. We're out of balance with each other. So it's a much bigger thing than simply women healing their second chakras. It's really this whole energetic shift that's happening within each person. And then it's reflected culturally in the shifts that are starting to happen and need to continue for greater healing and balance to occur.
Right. Now, in my book, What is Healing? Awaken Your Intuitive Power for Health and Happiness, I talk about signs that your second chakra is balanced. So some of these signs are graceful movement. So you're able to move gracefully. Emotional intelligence. A lot of my clients, they think, oh, I'm not that smart. But to me, the highest intelligence is emotional intelligence, being able to read people, knowing what to say, knowing when to be quiet, being in your own power. My mentor in healing taught me that at the second chakra, there's literally a balance between our sexuality and our power. And our power can cut off our sexuality, and our sexuality can cut off our power, and they need to be balanced. Also, again, the comfortable with your sexuality, as you meant, Mabel, able to change, like not staying stuck in the way you are. Healthy boundaries, emotional balance, right? It's not like you don't have emotions. Like when you're healthy, it's not like you never feel anything or feel anything differently. It's about balance and your ability to nurture self and others. And I'm sure you've noticed that, especially when women have cancers, whether it's breast cancer, cervical cancer, but cancers related to their female organs, part of what needs to happen is they need to really learn how to nurture themselves. And again, the ability to experience pleasure in healthy ways. So, Lisa Erickson, you're an expert in the way that women express our energy. And you say that women go through energetic shifts with the physical shifts tied to menstruation, pregnancy, and menopause. Can you go through each of those shifts? So when a girl starts to have her period, what literally happens to her energy body?
That is really when the anchoring into the second chakra begins to take place for her. And her whole psychological relationship to her burgeoning sexuality has a huge impact going forward. So it's so important that the images and the messages that we are portraying to girls at that age, it's so critical. I have 3 teenagers, 2 are girls, and just watching them go through this, and even in this age that seems so progressive, seeing the kind of messages that they receive around their own sexuality and their own body image is concerning. It's really something you have to constantly be working to nurture. But then also energetically, what starts to happen is with that cycle, we have these hormonal shifts each month. There's also the second chakra is really waxing and waning. It literally moving into ovulation becomes more solid, more emanating. We know from a hormonal perspective, women are actually emanating different charismatic hormones at that time, right? And then in moving into menstruation, it's like it's a bud that is going into seclusion. And a woman knowing that we can't organize our lives around it, but you knowing it, you can allow yourself a little bit more containment during your cycle, during menstruation, recognizing it's actually an incredible time for seeing, for clarity, for contemplation, and that the peak of your cycle, ovulation, is actually an incredible time to put yourself out there in a big way, to really go out more, to really bring a creative project to fruition. So just even working with it that way psychologically is really empowering, because otherwise a lot of women really just relate to it as a nuisance instead of understanding this cycle has tremendous power once you understand how to work with it. So I'll let you, do you want me to keep going, or should I stop with that one?
Yeah. Okay. So now what happens to a woman energetically when she's pregnant?
So during pregnancy, the physical body, of course, is going to be the physical doorway for another physical body to be born. The second chakra is the spiritual doorway for another spirit to be born. And essentially during the early stages of pregnancy, the second chakra is kind of opening and closing on the inner planes, not just the outer planes, the inner planes, you could say the spiritual planes. Over the course of pregnancy, the sacral chakra gets more and more open. And that pregnancy glow that we sometimes talk about, which of course has a hormonal component as well, is really this second chakra going to this fully open state on the inner planes. It's actually a level of opening that in the tantric teachings is something we seek, right? We seek to be able to gain control over opening the second chakra in that way, because that chakra is a doorway into primordial creative energy. And it happens spontaneously during pregnancy. So it can be a real opportunity for women to experience what that feels like and to connect with it. It can be a real creative rebirthing of themselves. Now, of course, after that, you have the baby, which is very, very opens your heart, but is very fatiguing and very tiring. And so then it's all about learning to work with that mother-child energy line and learning how to care for yourself in addition to your baby and learning all those lines. And so sometimes this opening of the sacral chakra that happened during pregnancy, it's a while before a woman can really tap into that again because she needs to adjust to this mother-child energy line.
And no, what about during menopause?
Yeah. Well, perimenopause has become like my favorite thing. And I am through menopause. But perimenopause, which is this phase in which really it can be up to 10 years long, they're learning. It's when our hormones have started to shift, but perhaps the cycle's still regular, perhaps it's starting to become irregular. It can be anywhere from 3 to 10 years leading to the final cycle for a woman. And part of what's happening during that time is Kundalini surges. We all experience somewhere between 41 and 43 an astrological transit, the Uranus opposition, where Uranus is in opposite where it was in our chart. And Uranus is actually the planet of Kundalini. And so this is kind of what kicks off the midlife crisis for both men and women, or what we've come to call the midlife crisis. It doesn't have to be a crisis, but it's a time of these Kundalini surges occurring in the chakras. And what tends to happen is whatever a woman has not dealt with in relationship to her power, it will rise to the surface. And depending on the amount of time a woman has spent up to that point, working on her personal growth, it could be smoother because this could be just a final revisiting of certain themes. If she has not done that work, she will be called to do it, whether through a physical challenge or emotional. And if a woman can work with it in that way, then menopause is a birth into her full spiritual power. With our cycle ending, we've been tied to this physical cycle. That now ends. There's the possibility of identification with the energy body getting magnified a millionfold, and that second chakra being open all the time, like in the last stages of pregnancy, all the time. And that's tremendous creative and wisdom power. So really, menopause is great.
Yeah.
I'm trying to convince everyone of that.
Yeah, I'm about to become 61.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah. And, my 50s after menopause was I published 9 books.
There you go. You're the classic example. Okay, I need you as one of my case studies.
Yeah. I published 1 book, earlier on, but it was literally that, again, like you said, just being able to hold that feminine goddess energy all the time.
Yeah.
In a very balanced way, and allow this true explosion of creativity.
Well, so that's it. So this is my first book, and I just turned 53 yesterday. So I'm really at the start of it. Yeah. So I hope my 50s are as productive as yours.
No doubt they will be. So again, for women who are listening, there's always things that you and I as healers can do for people, and then there's what they can do for themselves. Yeah. So Lisa Erickson, author of Chakra Empowerment for Women, what do you think we women can do to hold our divine goddess energy on a regular daily basis so that we can express the full power of who we are as women?
Yeah, I feel learning in this day and age in particular, really learning to work with your energy body in a very conscious way is invaluable. So that's really what I was trying to do in this book, is develop self-guided techniques for women who can't do sessions with me or with you, or for women who do but want to also work with stuff on their own, and really offer ways specifically to work with some of these life transits and with chakra activations that you can do on your own, on the spot. Practice them at home, and then when you need more navel chakra energy in your daily life, clue into that and use it. It's kind of like beyond mindfulness. There's so much talk about mindfulness these days, and in a situation, taking a breath so you have space to choose your response as opposed to reacting. Well, you can go beyond that. You can choose your energy. You can really shift your energy, and the chakras are a tremendous tool in the moment for being able to do that. Once you do that, then you're no longer a victim of your environment and your situation. Your energy doesn't just reflect what's happening to you. You're bringing your energy. You're the one setting the tone in the room, what the vibration is, and of a situation. You're in control of how it's impacting you by really having this control over your own energy body. And that's available to anyone. So I think that's really, to me, the key piece.
Right. And, I also want to add for our audience that there's a difference between yin and yang energy. And
Mm.
in our culture, we're all taught produce, which usually means money, money, money. And when women are too young, they get exhausted. That's
Yes.
why I wrote my book, Unlimited Energy Now. So a lot of women are suffering from yin deficiency,
Mm.
right? And yin is quiet, it's inward. It is feminine, it's the moon energy. So,
Yeah.
in my view, the more that we can nurture our
Yeah.
true feminine nature, the healthier you will be. And
Yeah.
that's not acting like a man,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, Lisa Erickson, author of the wonderful book Chakra Empowerment Women for Women, any final thoughts for our audience?
Just that you have more power than you could possibly know, that it's always available to you, and to find those moments of yin, to go inward and connect with it, find the modality that works for you. And unlimited shifts are possible. And you're needed right now. So bring it forth.
You've been listening to the Natural Healing Show for UK Health Radio, your global feel-good radio. I'm your host, Catherine Carrigan, medical intuitive healer and Amazon #1 bestselling author. You can find out more about me and my work at catherinecarrigan.com and unlimitedenergynow.com. While you're there, definitely sign up for my newsletter so you can learn even more about how you can heal yourself naturally. Our guest today has been Lisa Erickson. You can find out more about her and her wonderful work at chakraempowermentforwomen.com. And remember, when you take the time to nurture your divine feminine energy, you experience natural healing. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.